Hello again. I promised you punch ladles and I wasn't lying. We're going to look at the earliest sort of punch ladles. These are all silver ones. Get punch ladles 16th, 17th century. As long as you've had punch bowls, you have punch ladles. But they're in all sorts of different materials, namely turned wood. And if you've got a bit more money, they start to have silver elements with them, silver bowls and silver shafts. You'll be very lucky to find a 17th century example of a punch ladle. They're as rare as hen's teeth. What you might find is an early 18th century example, but they're difficult to find in good condition. But what most of you will have seen are late 18th, early 19th century punch ladles. They become more affordable. There's less work in them. They abound. And because of that, they're quite cheap at auction. But also, when the early good ones come up, sometimes they slip through and people don't realise it, and you end up paying, less than £100 for a really good early rare early 18th century punch ladle, as I did in this instance. This is about the earliest you're going to find, 1730s, 1720s, 1730s. This is made in London by a rare female goldsmith, so actually it's extremely valuable because of that, but called Edith Fletcher, who I'd never come across, but she's an extremely scarce female silversmith, and it's made in London in 1733. This bowl at this period, look how deep it is. Always circular, and very deep. This can be shallow, or it can have an inverted, often has a little inverted lip like this, little bit of turning round it. This is a good one. This is a good one. Nice heavy gauge. All of this is hand raised at this point from a heavy gauge of silver. It's attached to a silver socket with a little bit of decorative turning here, and this heart-shaped plate which it attaches to. If there's a weak point on these ladles, it's here. This is where you've got the weight of the liquid in here, you've got the handle. The wood handle's quite strong. If it's going to break, it's either going to break here, the handle's going to break away from the socket, or the socket itself will break. That's why that plate's there. It's for strength. But Georgians being Georgians, they also decorated it into a heart-shaped form, or at least Edith Fletcher's workshop did. Turned wooden handle, always nice and decorative, always thick at this period. They're quite thick, chunky things. They're proper bits of silver at this point. With a specialist, if it wasn't by Edith Fletcher, who's much rarer than normal, what would this be? This would be between £400 and £600, maybe a touch more, because it's in perfect condition. Quite tricky to find these in perfect condition. That's a London one. This is exactly the same year as that one, but this is provincial. This is made in Newcastle in 1733 by James Kirkup. A couple of differences. Let's compare them. Shallower bowl. In a minute, we'll get to the point that isn't a period or a regional thing. That's just expense. It would have probably cost half as much to make this one, or 2/3, because it uses less silver. That's just a question of economy. It's still circular. It still has, even though it's a lip on this one, an inverted rim. The socket, funnily enough, is more substantial. It still has a plate attaching it to the bowl, but this is simpler. Probably because it's provincial, it's simpler. It's just a little circular plate. Marked, again, probably because it's provincial, on the base rather than inside the bowl, which is a sort of a London thing. Values, we don't want to get bogged down in money. This is a perfect example, is going to be £700-800 because it's Newcastle, and a perfect Newcastle one is jolly rare. But we won't do values for all of these things, but it's just as well to tell you this is the premium for these rare early ladles. You'll Do well to find Newcastle ladle of this period, but I have two. Smugness abounds. This is 1734. It's only a year later. You can see that is peas in a pod when it comes to the early London one. This is what I was saying. It's a question of expense. It's not a regional variation that this other Newcastle one has a smaller bowl. It's just the person that bought this wanted to spend less. Always the case with silver. Always think about that. Originally, it's a question of how much metal, how much the original purchaser wanted to spend. This is splendid. It has a crest and a period inscription for a member of the Headley Dent family in Short Flat Tower, which is an important building in Northumberland, a landmark, and this is by Francis Batty II. Again, this one is marked on the base, but it doesn't have a strengthening plate. And that's probably why it's broken, because that is a repair. That's what you must always look for. They will often repair. You'll often be able to see it, and I hope I can get a picture of this more clearly on the inside of the bowl. You can see it there. You'll get that marking where actually the handle has broken away and it's taken a little bit of the bowl with it, and then that's been soldered back together. That's a really old solder repair. That was done when the carousing and when the breaking happened. Always check early ladles for that. It's a shame, because actually in good condition, this is easily over £1,000 with all its associations. It's probably one of the nicest provincial punch ladles you'll see, but it has its faults. Nothing wrong with buying silver that has its faults, as long as the price you're paying accounts for that. That's all I'll say on that subject. Now, this is the shape we've had for the earlier period, early part of the 18th century. In about 1735, 1740, maybe even a little bit earlier, because they're concurrent styles, the shape of the bowl changes, and you get this. This is this sort of, often they're called goose egg bowled ladles. They're early, they're still early, but you get this sort of egg-shaped bowl. You're getting the beginnings of a lip to make it easier to actually pour out the liquid when you're having a party. This one, again, lovely turnwood handle. Always look for a nice turnwood handle. Socket's a bit plainer than all the others we've seen. There's no turning. It does have, unlike Francis Batty of Newcastle, it does have its plate there. It was very cheap because it only has partial marks in the bowl. Happily, those partial marks are for Chester. You can only see the leopard's head and the corner of the town mark. You can't see, you can see where the date letter was, and you can see probably even a suggestion of the maker, but, you know, goodness knows. But that is Chester. Chester punch ladles, again, are extremely rare. So even though this has had a little repair, always look here, little repair. This probably not as obvious, but if I breathe on it, and upside down, you'll see it there. Clear as day, you can see the solder showing up. So lots of these ladles break here. That's why there's a premium to finding one in perfect condition. Lots of these ladles break here, but this is Chester. I don't know how many Chester punch ladles there are. They're probably less than 4 or 5 in the world. So even one in a sort of slightly rough state with almost obliterated marks, if you get the opportunity to buy it, which I did off a well-known internet auction site for the price of a chip supper for a family of 3, which is incredible. Then there's this example, which you saw me cleaning last week. How to clean silver. How dull was that? This is Richard Gosling, London, 1741. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed it is no longer egg-shaped. The egg has evolved to the Nivette bowl. So you start to get a point there. It's still an early form. All of the ladles we've looked at up to now, all of this is hand raised, thick gauge silver. It's got a lovely, beautifully made turned tubular socket here, and a lot of work's gone into turning the wooden handle. This one, funnily enough, all the others have been crested. Lovely initials to the base. You'll get initials on the bases. You'll often get them here, or little crests. Much more commonplace to see initials than a crest. Again, lovely marks in the bowl. That's a super thing. And that one, reinforced with its little shield shaped. The heart shaped is earlier, on the earliest one we saw. These little shield shaped plates that join the handle to the bowl. And that's in perfect condition. That's a stunner. That was for buttons. These are all rare. You can find them, but they're rare. It's taken a long time to put all these together and then not be able to sell them for them to accrue. This is super because it's Irish. Irish bits of silver always are. This is then where this develops too. So the plain Navette bowl with the points, it becomes this. It becomes the sauce boat shaped bowl with a lip and a waved rim. The rim is still everted, but it's all shaped now. It's sort of cut work. Also, we have a coin in the bowl. You often get coins set into the bases of punch ladles, possibly to show allegiance to the crown, possibly to commemorate a date that's on the coin. This again still has its beautiful turned wooden handle. This handle's a bit more elaborate, isn't it? Irish and Scottish ladles, punch ladles, tend to have more elaborately turned wooden handles. They also remain with wooden handles for a lot longer when the English ones switch over to something else, which we'll see in a second. But that is a sort of mid 1750, 1760 style of ladle. No longer circular, no longer egg-shaped, no longer Navette. Now we've got a lip to the end of it. That's quite pronounced. That's gorgeous. That's by William Townsend of Dublin. But then we get on, excuse me whilst I briefly wipe my nose, slight cold coming. Then we get on to the type of ladle that is ubiquitous. And so when I say punch ladle, that's what a lot of you will have seen at auctions. This bowl is actually quite nice gauge, but this bowl can get quite whippy. I've got a whippy one coming up. Show you in a minute. The socket now is vestigial, almost. Very short little socket. And you get this flattened piece of silver joining the bowl to the stem, often pinned, often with a little pin in for strength. They're flimsier. And it's all because of that. This is no longer turned wood. This is baleen. Baleen is the material that makes the filtration system of a whale. And it has a plastic quality, and it was used in the Georgian and Victorian period as a sort of plastic substitute before they developed them. They would cut strips of it, you could heat it up, and then you could decoratively twist it. The only problem was it's fibrous material and it will split and fray. Often these handles, particularly when they're thick sections of baleen like this, will start to crack and open up. Here, it's not uncommon to see one of these completely blown out. This is why they have this. It's not just decoration, this little end cap. That is to gather. Think of a frayed rope and all the strands of the rope. That is to gather everything together and keep it right and tight. And again, that's pinned in place. You'll always look round, see a little pin going through. So a lot of these are pinning to the bowl, not soldering. This one I have, luckily to show you what a commonplace one looks like. But this is provincial, probably colonial, probably Caribbean islands or something like that. And it is also, and I've never seen this before, so I might as well show you, Masonic, as it has Masonic emblems. Can you believe it? On the bowl and an initial. Without that, if that were a London ladle, these are the ones that are worth about £100 or less, and sometimes quite a lot less. What I will also say is we've gone back to a circular bowl, but you can have different shapes of bowl as well. You can have the navette shape. You often have the one with the lip. This being circular, we'll place it with the conjunction of a whalebone handle to being early 19th century. This is now not an 18th century piece of silver. Early 19th century. Often you'll see them with a coin inset, and often you'll see some sort of decoration around the very edge. This is because those bowls, and they will be unmarked, completely unmarked, are made from a large silver crown, the large 5-shilling piece, and usually a sixpence or a shilling, usually a sixpence, from an earlier reign. And they were given to the goldsmith, and he would turn the crown, he would hammer the crown into a bowl, which is why you've got this slightly smaller, meaner, thinner bowl, and that would obliterate all the decoration on both surfaces of the coin, but it would leave the milled edge with the inscription running round visible here. And then he'd set the shilling in the base. And stick on little socket, little hastily made thin tinny socket, and a twisted bit of baleen, which of course took nowhere near the time and skill of turning something in wood, which a silversmith would have had to have a specialist outworker make. This he could have knocked up himself. They become cheaper and more ubiquitous. Now the last one I've got to show you, my goodness, we've done ladles to death. This again, a broken handle, I'm afraid. This again shows you a typical 19th century punch ladle. This section A is much longer and thinner, often plain, sometimes bright cut. Little socket here, flimsy, silly bit of turned baleen there. Not often you get turned baleen, and that's why, because it breaks. Very simple attachment here to the back. Splays out. You'll often get this bifurcating of the stem. It was felt to give it a bit more strength, but I don't think it really did. And that's a very typical 19th century shape, just oval. Oval with a plain inverted rim. The reason I've got this, there are two reasons. Firstly, this is York. This is Hampstead Prince and Cattle's, marked on the side. Maker's mark, standard mark, and duty mark only. And even in a broken state, it's such a rare thing. I mean, York punch ladles, forget it. Insanely rare. But also, I bought this from a well-known auctioneer's, and they didn't identify that the coin set in the base, which admittedly has been slightly later done and has a little, more than a little rough solder around it, is in fact gold. It's a gold 1/3 guinea piece, and I actually paid for this less than the scrap value of the coin in the bowl. This can actually be a problem with a lot of these, because when they have valuable gold coins in them, people cut them out and scrap them, and then you're left with a ruined ladle. And maybe somebody thought about doing this, which is why it's got sold around it, or maybe someone just thought they'd embellish it at a later date, 20 or 30 years later, stick a gold coin in the base, and they got someone who was a bit cack-handed to do it. We'll never know. But nonetheless, interesting and rare. Lots of these things are underpriced, undervalued at auction, and brilliant for the collector. One last thing, even though I think this is going to make it the longest video I've ever done and you're all asleep, I will show you, I did tell you that 17th century punch ladles are near impossible to find, which is true, but here is an example. You'll be very lucky if you find one of these. This is sort of the original, the grandad. This is almost a shortened tumbler of a bowl. you'll see that on the very early ones, this tubular cannon-handled socket will be at least half the length of the handle. And then you'll have just a beautiful decorative bit of native wood turned there. This has, albeit unidentified the maker, this has marks for late 17th century Chester, and is possibly one of the rarest, certainly one of the rarest English punch ladles known. Of that there's no question, and probably one of the rarest bits of Chester silver known. Again, not to gloat, I was prepared to pay many thousands of pounds for this when it came up at auction, and it made, let us just say, not that much money. Punch ladles, they can be good to you. Keep an eye out for them. I think that's as exhaustive as we can be for the moment, as we pass the 20-minute threshold. So goodness knows if I'll be able to upload this on YouTube or not. Probably not. But until next week, goodbye and good antiques hunting.